Welcome back to the Building Bigger Lives podcast. I'm Kathryn Peterson here with my great co host, Michael Regan. Today, we're going to go through a few things to get your year started great. So, execute the new year, simple steps for a smooth start. So, Michael, welcome in. It's great to see you in this 2026.
Yeah, it is definitely the new year. I'm glad to be here, glad to be with you, and glad that we get to create a framework for the year ahead for our listening audience, because I think a lot of the things we'll get to talk about apply to all of us. You know, whether you are an entrepreneurial person running your own little business, whether you're working within the framework of a larger business, or maybe, who knows, maybe we found some folks that are, in a global machine and they are working within a giant corporation. I think any of you will find some application from the framework we'll lay out today. So I look forward to this one, Kathryn. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as someone's looking at the new year, what's the first part of the plan that they should look at to kind of get things started?
Well, from my point of view, and I want to stress that strongly, that just because I have a point of view doesn't mean everyone has to agree with it. From my point of view, I really think it's critical for me to have some time where I review my personal priorities before I dive right into my professional ones. Because if I can get clear on the things that matter most to me individually, then I'm more likely to design things that I'll be happy with once I get into my business planning and my structure that goes around that. So for me, that's a life plan review. The document I've created probably 20 years ago now has been updated and revised as my kids have grown and left the house. Lori and I are now in our 33rd year of marriage, so our priorities, even in that context, have evolved over time. Lots of things change, but I need a guiding document as I go through those phases of life to keep me focused on what's ahead. Where am I still growing toward? What are the things that are going to be important to me when I'm 10 further years down the road and looking back, and I want to be really happy with my progress. So I'm going to, start with a life plan review just to make sure that the things I said were important to me last year still resonate with me this year. And then some of the actionable items that I concluded are still important actionable items. So you and I've talked a lot about, the KISS acronym. So that's essentially what I'm doing with my life plan review is I'm looking for the things I'll keep doing, the things I'll improve upon, the things I'll start doing, and the things I'll stop doing. But that life plan review really helps me get my personal priorities and my personal commitments reset for the year ahead. So that's always where I start. How about you, Kathryn?
Yeah, that's a great place to start, I think. Plus, if the personal if personal life isn't going well, it's going to impact work. So it's always a great place to start because if things are really sour, that's going to take so much time that you're going to have to plan for. So I think it's definitely a good place to start. And honestly, depositing some time into each of those life accounts is super important as you plan out the year. So and one thing that I kind of forgot about with the life plan is the people in your life are changing, so your life plan should be changing. Plus, the people in your life plan are getting older. I think we talked about on a prior episode that I had get on the floor and play with Abby. Well, that would be weird now that she's 17. So you have to adjust things as you move ahead and as the people around you change their life.
So when you get into my season, Catherine, don't delete those old action plans. You'll find out those might apply someday to their kids, and
That's
you'll end up
right. That's
you'll end up
right.
revisiting some of those. All right,
Yeah.
but that's it. I think anchoring it with a personal review of your personal priorities and commitments is a great place to start. And once I've done that, I've got a much better context for what I might want to do to review my long-term business vision as well. And so that's where I'll tend to shift next because my business vision is clearly much more specific to my professional life, but in a similar context, it's like a GPS tool now that I have. When I have my personal priorities and my professional priorities in the framework of a long-term vision, I'm able to set like you do with the GPS when you type in the address of where you want to go. I can set some destinations for my long range future, and that makes sure that my life is heading in a direction that I think I'm going to be happy with. Now, some of you are listening and saying, "Well, how does this guy know where his life is going to go? How does this guy know what he's going to be dealing with?" And it is true. These things aren't me predicting the future or demanding that I get to control everything around me, but I have a responsibility to define the orientation, the direction that I'm going. And as long as I'm really happy personally and professionally with the direction I'm going, I'm more likely to be really happy with the results I'm getting as I walk down that road or as I take that journey. So this GPS analogy works really well for me because again, you know how GPS functions. It's essentially looking at an axis and a radius somewhere on the earth, defining a destination, and then working out some routes. I think we talked about this when Todd went into the Grand Canyon. He didn't have, a classic roadmap. He had to use tools to define the orientation of where am I and how do I communicate and all that fun stuff. Well, if I know where those are and it produces some routes for me, I now have choices. Just like a GPS will let you take the short route or the fast route or the scenic route. Well, in life, if I know where my personal and professional priorities are aimed and where I hope they're taking me, I now participate in the route I choose. And those become the decisions I make and the actions I take, the relationships I build. All those things, whether personal or professional, require me to put some time into looking out into that future. So that's why I'll move from that life planning review personally into that business vision review professionally, because then I feel like I've got all the information in front of me. Now the only job I have left is let's go. So I really think those are the first two places I'll tend to
Mhm.
start.
And one thing I'll say, one year I did a vision board and I put it as my desktop screen. And I had kind of some big things on there like reinvent the wheel and change my environment at home and some things like that. And they didn't happen in the way I thought,
Mm.
but I still got there. So that was the year I ended up changing companies. Talk about reinventing the wheel. That wasn't my plan, but that's kind of how it ended up. So sometimes if you do create that vision of, hey, this is what I want my business to look like in 5 years, 10 years, you'll get there. It just may not be exactly with the steps that you've thought through in your head. So that's why the business vision is good to go back and be like, oh yeah, I did actually hit those. It ended up to be a different thing, but my brain knew where I was going and the world knew where I was going. I just took a different path.
That's it's a great reminder because even if we looked at some of the world's great visionaries, people over, the last 50 to 100 years that we at least can say, "Oh yeah, I remember that person and I remember that vision." So whether you're talking about JFK in the 60s having the vision for us sending men to the moon and bringing them back safely, whether you picture, somebody like Ronald Reagan in the 80s who had a vision for a world in which Soviet communism wasn't such a threat. And you could pick dozens of these examples, right up to, Steve Jobs, envisioning that we'd be walking around with a tool in our hand that was more powerful than the very computers that sent those guys to the moon 40 years before that. Visionaries accept what you just said. They accept that the version of how it works out might not work out exactly like they see it, but it's that vision that compels them to keep fighting to find out, to keep pushing forward, to get out of bed every morning at oh dark 30 and do the hard work and do the thing. So I totally align with the way that you said that because I don't think vision demands that we have everything figured out and that it go exactly as we designed. We'll get into that maybe in a minute of what are some things you can do to be more acutely committed to the things that you're going to do. But at this phase of the process, we're simply just making sure that we have really good alignment over the direction that we're heading. So you'll hear words like, mission and convictions and purpose. Well, these words matter when you're doing a business vision review or any kind of a personal professional vision review because your mission is just simply, what is it that I'm trying to do? As a professional, what am I trying to do? If you said change the wheel, reinvent it. If that's what you're trying to do, then pretty quickly you'll need to define the purpose, which answers the why. Why is that so important? Why do I need to do this? Why does the world need this? Why am I going to fight so hard to accomplish that mission? So the mission and the purpose become part of that review. And then the convictions are really those values that you hold so dearly that you're willing to fight for them. Sometimes
Mhm.
people use the phrase, that's a hill I'm willing to die on. That's usually where their convictions have shown up and they've said, I just, that's a bridge I can't cross, or whatever phrase they'll use. Those are those deeply rooted values. And it's really important to review those from time to time, because sometimes in my life, I thought I had conviction over certain values. And I found out later that, oh, no, that's more negotiable than younger me used to
Hmm.
think. I used to think that was a hill I wanted to die on. And now that I've seen a lot of people die on that hill, I've decided maybe that's not worth the cost. And so as time goes on, you start to get tighter on those, and you start to realize, no, there's really only a handful of things that are really that critical to me. And I think those are important to review, because they do help you know what to say yes and no to as you move into the year ahead. So yeah, that's life planning, that's business vision. Let's continue the framework.
Okay, great. So then I think what comes next is the focus plans. So let's talk through those. We have a lot of podcasts on these, but I think it's good to bring them up because it's part of the steps. And I think it's a really important step in nailing down how to have a great year.
Yeah, you're exactly right. The purpose of revisiting these isn't to replay old episodes, it's to remind people where these fit in the framework. And so you're exactly right. Once I'm oriented around that GPS analogy, at some point the idea is, well, then let's go. We've got the destination, we've picked the route, whether it was fast or scenic or whatever we picked. Time to go. Well, a focus plan is a really great tool then in which to break down some of these long-term goals. Like, let's say we went through the exercise that we talked about on an end of the year podcast around New Year's business planning. One of the key exercises to the New Year's business plan is to pick your top three big goals for the year, and to decide what are the necessary commitments that would be required, the disciplines is the word we used, to achieve those goals. Well, if I've got these three big goals for the year, at some point, I can't really operate at that level of macro. I've got to get more granular and say, okay, but what am I doing this week? What am I doing today? So, my recommendation is to frame this focus plan in 4 quarters. It's very similar to the analogy of the way a football coach will design a game plan for a football game. He'll design it in 4 quarters, because you've got to establish certain things in the first quarter to create the momentum you need in the second quarter, to create I guess, the advantage you're looking for by the third quarter, so that ultimately by the fourth quarter you can get the win. Well, same thing in our focus planning. I think you can design some things when you look at those big three goals for the year to say, okay, if that's even going to have a chance of happening this year, what are the most critical commitments I need to make in this first quarter to get that going? So you're breaking these things down. And that's really what a focus plan is designed to do. I love the version of ours because it's a simple one-page focus plan. And maybe because I'm just wired towards simplicity, or maybe because I've seen enough evidence now over the years that people tend to like simplicity. They like it when you can make it work in a frame that they can all easily understand. A one-page simple focus plan allows me to stay focused on the outcomes I want by the end of the quarter, the commitments I made to do things on a regular basis, and the projects I committed to complete. And they're
Hmm.
all built around a theme that is central to that quarter. So that's the question I always ask myself before I put that plan into action is, what is this plan all about? And sometimes I come up with a word, sometimes I come up with a phrase. Occasionally, I've even come up with a graphic, like where I've drawn something out, but I need
Mm.
something that centers me to that plan, because every day I'm going to get up and look at this, and every day it's going to guide the decisions I make and the actions I take, so that I'm really satisfied by the end of each day that I've done a good job and I'm still on track toward those big goals for the year. So yeah, that's exactly the next step is let's break down those big annual goals into quarterly focus plans.
Absolutely. And I think just to bring up quickly, that has goals, disciplines, projects, and a theme potentially, or kind of the four parts of that. And I think the other thing that's kind of nice that I love about the focus plan is those projects because sometimes it's something that, yeah, it didn't quite make the big three, but it's something that needs to be done that's just been on my list and I need to knock that out this quarter. And so that's something that you're going to start and finish that quarter. So I think that those are kind of it keeps me focused on because sometimes the yearly plan is so much. It's so big. It seems so far away in Q1. But if you can focus in on a quarterly plan, you can say, hey, here's some things I can knock out and start to feel really productive this year up front.
Well, I've got good news for you, Catherine Peterson. I think that's where we can get to this fourth and final step of the framework, the priority management plan. Because you're right, that big annual plan does have some huge accomplished components, I should say, huge components you're desiring to accomplish. But you're right, they're not all going to happen in January, February, and March. And some of these things you have to placehold for later in the year, later in the spring, later in the summer, maybe even toward the fall, a year from now. Those are going to be the things you're going to get to. Well, an annual calendar is a really good tool for this. Jesse Itzler likes to use the big ass calendar. If you've seen that, a lot of people get that on their Instagram feed around the New Year's. It's a great visual tool for this. A giant poster you put on your wall that's designed to give you a view of every day of the year and then map it out. I still use the at a glance, which is the one that everybody's seen in their office for most of their careers, but I use the dry erase version because I know that sometimes the things I've mapped out end up changing a little bit, and I want to be able to erase them. I don't want to have a bunch of scratch outs on a handwritten one. But I use the annual calendar so that as I have that annual plan, I'm starting to placehold the things that I've said need to happen in the second and the third and the fourth quarter so that I can start to look at my year in terms of balance. And when I say balance, as we've talked about in previous episodes, I don't mean balance like everything has to be a perfect carpenter's level balance, but balance more in the terms of, hey, that's a lot going on in the second quarter. Hey, that's a lot I've committed to that's coming up in the third quarter. Or maybe the opposite, like, wow, I'm front loading everything and I don't have much going on. Like I might need to load balance and move some things around. It also helps when you circle back around to that very first step, which was the personal life plan review. There are some commitments you made there that also need to show up in that annual calendar. And folks, don't skip this. This seems so obvious that most of us probably think it's hilarious to mention, but get your birthdays, your anniversaries in that annual calendar. There's really no good excuse for getting caught off guard by a special event with someone you love. You know when it's coming, so let's get that in the calendar. There's no good excuse for not having your taxes prepared on time. You know when the IRS would like that payment. Block out the due dates. You know when your health accounts need some, an annual review with your doctor or maybe a couple of cleanings with your dentist. These are mundane things until you forget about them. And when you forget about them, they become frustrating because you're trying to fit them in later in a very full day or a very full week. So the annual calendar helps you get all of the big stuff framed early on. So then later, when you're trying to chunk that down in your actual desktop calendar, whether you use a journal or an Outlook tool, you're you're able to get more granular because you've already designed that framework for the annual year, both personally and professionally. I'm a huge fan of it. Catherine, I hope I've crammed that down your throat enough over the last 10 years. Are you using the annual calendar?
To a point, not quite like you, but I do have Outlook that I literally put everything in. And so it's pretty easy for me to go out. Like I have all of the school breaks on my calendar blocked. I have a lot of stuff blocked. We have our calendar for marketing in there. So I know when our realtor party next December is going to be and it's blocked. So we essentially use it just not in one big visual. I keep thinking about it, but I need a place to put it and that's harder than you
It's
think.
Yeah, and so I'm not trying to sell it. I just want to make sure our audience understands the difference between the two because I have everything
Yeah.
you said as well. The reason I use the visual because someone will say, "Well, wait a minute, if you're already using Outlook to do all that, why do you need the big poster on your wall?" For me, it's such a great visual tool. It's right here to my left, and it's a visual tool for me so that when things come up, because things do come up. Hey, we'd love to have you come out to our President's Club trip and deliver a keynote. Hey, we'd love to have you come in and meet with our team and host a workshop. Hey, I'm planning a fishing trip. I'd love for you to come along. Whatever the offer is, it's so nice before I dig into Outlook and I'm starting to scan week by week by week, hunting for where would that fit, to just look and say, oh, my June is wide open. That would be a great time to schedule that fishing trip. And
Mm.
and so helpful visual tool for me. I'm still going to use everything you just said to actually drive. That wall calendar isn't driving my daily decision making. It's more of a planning tool and then a good visual reminder of, oh yeah, I've got that coming up. That's going to be a busy month. So yeah, your personality as a listener may resonate with that, and it may not. These are not, guidelines that I'm going to ask you to hold to with any, religious fervor. These are just creative ideas, and some folks have benefited from them because they do need to see things a little differently. And last but not least, our friend Todd Bookspan, the author of the Win by Noon Journal. I know one of his ideologies is sometimes it's nice to do things that aren't on our computer because it just gives us a chance to get back to that
Hmm.
kinetic value of a pen and a paper or a dry erase and a whiteboard.
Yeah, very true. And I have had times, so last September, October, November, I just had to print a monthly calendar and write it all out because it was like one city, another city, different city, this meeting, that meeting, and it did really help me. And I just carried those everywhere with me those 3 months, and
You're like a
it
rock
did help
band
me
on
out.
tour. You needed your tour schedule. Which city do we
Right,
show up next?
right,
Yeah, that's great.
exactly.
So I hope people see this framework, Catherine. Let's just review it real quickly. Is the life plan is going to be that personal review of all of your priorities and really long-term planning so that you can drill that down and say, okay, what are the commitments I've made this year to deposit into that account in a way that I'll feel really happy with. And then I look at my professional version of this, that's the business vision, and I want to ask myself those same questions. Okay, now that I've got my personal prioritized first, where are the things in my business that I want to orient toward as I'm moving ahead in the year? And that's where that GPS analogy comes into play. I now have those destinations, the things I'm working toward. That allows me to do some things like a New Year's business plan and then chunk those down into a focus plan. And, we didn't talk about, how often we do these in terms of execution, but obviously a quarterly plan is going to be done 4 times a year, which means you probably want to have some time to review that 4 times a year.
Hmm.
Scorecard it. How did you do? How did you do against the plans that you made personally or professionally? How much progress did you make? That might help frame the next quarter plan. You may need to accelerate a little bit. You may need some new resources. You may have overcommitted and you need to figure out what to pull back so you can get a little bit more effective. Those quarterly reviews are really helpful. And that leads to that fourth quadrant when you're doing the annual planning. That's another option you have on that annual calendar is go ahead and schedule those quarterly reviews. They're coming. The end of the quarter will always be, on the same dates. So pick a day shortly thereafter where you can get the details you need. Sometimes that's a P&L, sometimes that's, a report. But you can scorecard. You can see how did I do against the things that I said I would commit to do that quarter, and that'll help you prepare for the quarter ahead. Those four anchor points, like I said in the setup, always matter. I don't care if I'm meeting with the leader of a large global organization or a small company based here in the United States or an individual. They all benefit from that same framework. They'll apply it a little differently and they'll cascade it throughout their organization a little differently, depending on the size of the organization. But those are tried and true anchor points. And I hope everyone understands those because I want you to feel like you have a sense of purpose in what you're doing this year. You can't control everything, but it's amazing how many things you can control when you start breaking them down. And then how many things that you don't control, but you still influence heavily because you put a lot of effort into it. And for me, that's the motivation to work through that core four framework.
Absolutely. And it's a great time of year to do that and sit down, spend some time. Plus, it's the time of year that may not be busy. So fit this in so that you can be busy later.
Yeah, I think for those of us in the listening audience who are going to catch this episode in January of 2026, you might have some time at the Martin Luther King holiday where it's technically a holiday. Maybe you don't have kids in school that day. Maybe you don't have, it's a banking holiday. So maybe you don't have transactional activity you can execute on, but it's still a Monday and you still want to get some things done that feel valuable. Boy, what a great day to work on some of these things. If you're catching this maybe
Hmm.
after that holiday, President's Day is coming up in February, a similar holiday where you've maybe got some space in your calendar that's already there. You just need to utilize it in a way that's really effective. Some of you are saying, yeah, I wish I had those holidays off, but we don't. We work those days. That's just still a work day for me. Well, then you might have to be a little more intentional and find a spot. Maybe you've got to take some PTO to get this time worked out, and you just have to pick the day that works for you. Maybe it's a random Friday, but don't confuse your reasons with excuses. Sometimes there are really good reasons, and it's fair to work around those, but don't turn them into excuses for why you didn't take the time to set this framework in place, because ultimately you're responsible for your own satisfaction with the work that you do. You can't control the world around you. You can't control everything that other people do, but you have a lot of control over the decisions that you make and the actions you take. And those come from beliefs you hold deep inside of you. And so I hope today I've helped you identify some of those things you really believe are possible, and you're willing to take some action on them. So Kathryn, I love that you brought this one up. Any thoughts or closing thoughts that we may have skipped over that need a little more attention?
If you've listened to this and you've thought, gosh, I really want to hear more about, we probably have a prior episode about it. So just go in, search the episode, or reach out to us. We can tell you some good episodes to listen to, and we'll dig in further too. We've got some planned that dig into some of these topics a little bit more. So stay tuned. And with that, I think I'll close this one out, Michael, unless you have any closing thoughts.
No, I love that you're reminding them, because that is really important to me as well. When we post these episodes, we design them in some cases to be evergreen episodes. You can go back to any of these episodes on these topics, and you'll get similar value out of them, even if they were framed at the time in 2024 or 2025. Don't let the post date fool you. There may be a few episodes in there on an event that happened in 2024 that's, long gone, and you could skip over that one. But you're exactly right. There's a gold mine of episodes there that will still be valuable. So I'm so glad you mentioned that. And maybe the only other piece I would encourage people to embrace in the year ahead, if they're looking for something new in this priority management plan, embrace margin, or what some folks call white space. It's such a valuable ingredient in the success formula. So much of our day is filled with activity, or our phone in our hand fills us with information. We're just constantly processing. White space is so valuable, and for some of you, that's just time to think. For some of you, that's just time to breathe. For some of you, that's time to go take a walk with your dog. But my goodness, white space will always produce dividends. So if I could encourage anyone to grab one thing that they're going to try to do differently this year, embrace margin and create some white space in your week.
Great. All right. Well, with that, we're going to close out this episode of Building Bigger Lives. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, all the places. Please reach out to us. Please share, please like, and please rate it if you get time. Thank you so much for listening.